Welcome once again to Heart of a Shepherd. We are today beginning a new study in the book of Numbers, Numbers chapter 1 and chapter 2. I've titled this devotion, God Determines the Stops and Starts in Life. Would you open your Bible with me to the book of Numbers? So let's begin with an introduction to this incredible historic book. And so our chronological study now is going to consider the fourth of 5 books known as the Pentateuch. And so far we've studied Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, and we will study beginning today the book of Numbers, and the 5th book of the Pentateuch was Deuteronomy, and that will be something we'll consider in the future. Now, Moses is the author of Numbers, and the setting is, verse 1, the first day of the second month in the second year following Israel's exodus out of Egypt. So we're down the road after Israel left Egypt. We have gone 1 year, 1 month, and we're beginning now. We are in the second year, the second month, and this will be in the first day of the month. Now, we ought to ask the question, why do events that happened thousands of years ago, why do they hold any significance for believers living in the 21st century? Well, Paul addressed that question in his letter to the believers in Corinth when he wrote, and I quote, "Now all these things, all the historical events of the Old Testament, happened unto them, Israel, for ensamples." Now that means for our pattern or model, and they are written for our admonition. And so why are these things important that we're studying? Because God saw fit in His wonderful wisdom to have those things that happened to Israel be recorded, that you and I, as believers, might learn from their example. There's an old saying, we watch somebody else fail and we know, let's not do that. And certainly that is true as we study Israel and Israel's history as a nation. And so it is essential then to know the Old Testament scriptures because they are instructive in God's providences, His blessings, and His judgments. Therefore, the more you and I study the Bible, the better we grasp God's ways and His will. Well, as we come to Numbers chapter 1, we ought to consider the background of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, the 12 tribes of Israel were descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob, the Old Testament patriarch whose name God changed to Israel. And so when we say the 12 tribes of Israel, we could just as easily say the 12 tribes of Jacob. Now, who was Jacob? He was the son of Isaac, and he was Abraham's grandson. Now, Abraham had 2 sons, Ishmael, who was his firstborn son. He was born to Hagar, an Egyptian identified with the Arabic people. However, God rejected Ishmael as Abraham's heir. In his old age, God fulfilled His promise, and Abraham's wife Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac, whom God chose as his father's heir. And so the Abrahamic covenant that was found and recorded first in Genesis chapter 12 passed to his son Jacob, and then to Jacob's 12 sons who fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, that brings us to Numbers chapter 1. What a privilege it is to hopefully give a little bit of an explanation and insight and understanding into these many things that we're studying. Consider then the first of 2 censuses that will be found in the book of Numbers. And we began with the elders of Israel, Numbers chapter 1 and verse 1 through 16. And we don't have time to examine the names or to read all of this passage, but what you find in the first 16 verses are not only the names of tribes, but the particular elders, the leaders of each of those tribes. And so before Israel departed Mount Sinai, the Lord commanded Moses to number the congregation of the children of Israel after their families by the house of their fathers, even male by their polls. And so they were to take a census of the people, and you'll notice in the passage here 20 years and older. And so what did that mean? It meant to number the fighting men of Israel, or we would say the men of fighting age. And so the 12 tribes of Israel were named and numbered, you'll notice, Numbers chapter 1 and in chapter 2. Now the census revealed the number of Israel's men of war by tribe, but you'll notice it excluded one of the tribes, and that was the priestly tribe of Levi, verse 47 through 50. And so taking its name from the census, we have the name, the book of Numbers, which again will record 2 head counts. The first in Numbers chapter 1 through 4, and the second will occur and be recorded in Numbers 26 and 27. And so the purpose of the book of Numbers was to document the number of able-bodied men of war, 20 years old and upward. And then looking at verses 17 through 54, we find able-bodied males aged 20 and older fit for war. And so the Lord charged Moses and Aaron with the responsibility of numbering the men of Israel. However, the census excluded the priestly tribe of Levi, whose duty was not to go to war for Israel, but it was to serve the Lord as the spiritual guardians of Israel. Now, the 12 tribes included the lineages of Joseph's sons. You'll see them named in verses 32 through 35, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so Ephraim and Manasseh were two of the 12 tribes of Israel. And you would say, well, how could that be? You've already said that the 12 sons of Jacob are the 12 tribes of Israel. Well, all of the tribes are included. However, in God's omniscience, he made sure that Jacob's sons were adopted. And they then did replace the sons of Jacob. Reuben and Simeon were replaced with Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, the total census of fighting men, you'll notice, excluding the men of Levi, numbered 603,500 men of war, all of whom, except for Joshua and Caleb, tragically, would perish in the wilderness due to their lack of faith and disobedience. That's obviously going to be a point of study in the future. Now, Numbers chapter 2. Here we have the arrangement of Israel's encampment by tribe. That is, when Israel was encamped as a nation, where the tribes were to be placed. Now, Numbers chapter 2 then gives the organization of Israel's encampment. Now, the 12 tribes were arranged into 4 divisions: east, south, west, and north. The tabernacle itself, with the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle was the central object of all the tribes. Each division consisted of 3 tribes. So 4 times 3 is 12. And so encamped around the tabernacle were the tribes, and each under a banner, a standard, if you might. Now, on the east side of the tabernacle was the tribe of Judah, and assigned under its banner were Issachar and Zebulun, verses 3 through 9. Now, under Reuben's banner on the south side of the tabernacle, we find Simeon and Gad, verses 10 through 16. West of the tabernacle was the standard of Ephraim, again, standard being a flag that's associated with a tribe or a nation, in this sense, a tribe. And so west of the tabernacle was the standard of Ephraim. Under its banner were encamped the tribes of Manasseh and Benjamin. Now, Dan's banner was on the north side of the tabernacle. Under it were found Asher and Naphtali. And then finally, the tribe of Levi. Now remember, it's not numbered among the warriors. And so the tribe of Levi was located around, encircling the tabernacle. And so all the other tribes were encamped around the tabernacle, but in the circle of that encampment, we find the tribe of Levi. Now, we find now also God's presence was represented by the tabernacle, and it was the dominant focus of Israel. Now, because worshiping and serving the Lord was central to Israel, the tabernacle was located in the center of the encampment with the tribe of Levi encamped around it, verse 53 now of chapter 1. Now, the Levites were charged with the responsibility of the tabernacle and the vessels used for worship and offering sacrifices. Well, I know this has been a long devotional, so give me a moment to close. As I close, I'm reminded that the Lord was the shepherd of Israel, and that he alone directed the starts and stops of the nation. When it was time to move, the Levites were responsible for taking down the tabernacle. When it was time to stop in their travels, the Levites set up the tabernacle amid the tribes, and of course all the tribes then encamped in their assigned geographical positions around the tabernacle. And so we close with a question for us. Who determines the starts and the stops in your life? Who is at the center of your heart and focus? We've already seen the lesson that for Israel, it was to be the Lord. But remember this, that the Lord demands the foremost place not only in Israel, but in your heart and my heart. That meaning in our thoughts and in our affections. Well, that's the close of the introduction to the book of Numbers, and we'll continue our study tomorrow. God bless, and bye-bye.